Okay, great. So welcome everyone. This is the second roundtable of this cycle that we organized with the Urban Theory Workshop network. So I don't know if any of you in the chat that is participating already attended one of our meetings, one of our seminars, but the concept of this series is to bring together PhDs working on similar themes, or that at least share some common interests. And when we use our platform, our network as a platform to provide connections, to provide, a space for discussions, which is quite informal compared to the more academic channels that I guess every one of us know. So today we have Sofia Leoni from Politecnico di Torino, Myriam Boualami from Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne, and Leah from UCL Bartlett School of Planning. Just to give you an idea about the program, I'm about to introduce the theme of this roundtable, and then I'll move to a short presentation of the presenters and what they're about to present, but they will be, of course, more specific, which is the second part of this seminar. So each presenter will have 15 to 20 minutes. Of course, we're flexible with time to present the research according to the main theme we established before. So there were discussions that were carried out before this seminar to find a common interest, to find a common ground for discussion. And then after the presentation, we will open the seminar to everyone. If there's any question you want to ask, just note it down, and then we'll collect them. We collect them later. If you feel like you want to intervene directly, you're more than welcome to do so. Otherwise, you can just write it up in the chat. So about the panel, let me just get my notes. All right. So the panel is called Pluralising Platform Geography through Methodology. So let's say the aim of this panel is to bring together emerging research on the spatial dynamics of digital platforms and their far-reaching impacts on contemporary geographies. So initially, the idea was inspired by one of the papers that I don't know if you had the chance to read, but I would advise you that you do if you have some free time, which is called Pluralising Platform Capitalism by Steinberg et al. So in their paper, let's say they launch a call to provide the plural perspectives on platformization and platforms at large. And this panel tries to do so, and tries to do so through methodology. So what we do through the presentations is to emphasize the diverse and localized expressions of platforms in different geographical, economic, and cultural contexts. What we believe is that rather than a monolithic model, this panel can propose something on the line of platforms as a heterogeneous agents of transformation. Going more specifically, there are three presentations in this panel, one by Sofia Leoni, and just a short bio about Sofia. So she's an architect and a PhD candidate in urban and regional development here at Polito. I'm just saying here because I'm in Turin, so it's easier for me. And she has been part of the China Room Research Group that was established in Turin, I guess, around 2020, 2000, even before, but she's part of the group since 2022. And she holds a master, both a Master of Architecture and a Bachelor of Architecture. So she's had some experience in the Asian context in China specifically. So she did a double master's degree in Tsinghua University of Beijing during the pandemic. And then during her academic journey, she also worked with other universities, including the University of Bruxelles, Shenzhen University of China, and then Brown University in the United States, where she's at now for a visiting research period. Her presentation is called Pluralizing Platform Practices in Rural Areas, Insights from Taobao Villages. So her presentation works on digital platforms, Taobao, and these digital platforms have fundamentally, according to, let's say, her argument, is that they have reshaped the social spatial dynamics across diverse contexts. But despite this diversity of context, this diversity of studies, platform studies often focus on urban-centric narratives or technologically driven interpretations, leaving rural, peripheral, and marginalized geographies underexplored. So in this sense, the case of Taobao villages, which is the theme of her research, offers the opportunity to reflect on this often forgotten dimension. And this case works in, let's say, this case study highlights the often overlooked interaction between rurality, platform practices, and logistics. So this is the center of our presentation, and the idea is to explore the infrastructural and socioeconomic shifts occurring in these Taobao villages using a multi-scalar approach that bridges spatial analysis and infrastructural thinking, particularly through logistics and platform studies. Then going even more specific, she focuses on 3 case studies within China, and these case studies were investigated through fieldwork, mostly. Now, I don't know how to pronounce these villages, but I'll do my best. Is Junpukun in Guangdong province, which is specialized in clothing and leather products. Then Wuhushen in Shenzhen province, which is more specialized in agricultural goods like tea and bamboo, and then Dongfeng in the Jiangsu province, which is instead more specialized in furniture and fake IKEA products. So this is about Sofia. Then turning to Leah, Aaron, as I said, she's in the final year of her PhD in the Bartlett School of Planning, University College London, and her research investigates the housing trajectories of international migration in Berlin and the way that housing platforms shape these trajectories. So her presentation will be about this. So the role of new platform in disrupting urban housing markets and how this impacts particularly international migration in Berlin. She goes even in more detail by analyzing brands like Airbnb that now have global reach and capable of let's say a niche of medium-term rentals that now are starting to be explored also in the literature, and rental platforms that has sprung up to cater to a demand for temporary stays in desirable urban locations, and Berlin in a way is amongst these locations. So according to her research, this technology not only open up opportunities for firms to exploit rent gaps, which are, let's say, internationalized, or as in the literature says, it's a planetary rent gap, which is not only local, but it's also more, let's say, widened up by international migration. But also by individuals, creating new avenues for revenue generation for which former rental regulations make no space, or which means that there's no way to, at the moment, to regulate this as they are quite new in the rental landscape. So drawing on the research she did with international migrants in Berlin, she reflects on the methodological challenges of researching platform-mediated housing markets, which operate in the shadow of such regulations. Using methods adopted from digital ethnography, such as the ones used in the literature by Duguay, Light, and Burgess, or work-through method, allowed her to engage with interlocutors' haptic and affective experiences of these sites, revealing the variations in practice and strategies which drive anticipated outcomes in the rental sector. What she argues is that these also generate moments of tension around privacy and ethics for the researcher as well as the researched. So she works at the intersection at different, let's say, multiple levels, but also at from different perspectives and different also experiences that occur within the platform. So reflecting on these methods, she foregrounds the importance of creating a space of vulnerability through distance as well as closeness, and highlights the difficulties of analyzing rich qualitative data through the tools currently available. So there's also this kind of methodological gap that is quite common to all presentations. That's also the this is also part of the interest of this panel specifically. So finally, Myriam Boualami. She's working on her PhD at the Center Marc Bloch and the UMR Geographicité as part of the AENR Records project under the supervision of Denis Eckert and Camille Roth. So her research focuses on the spatial effects of the digitization of the music industry, with particular attention to music streaming platforms. So her focus is on the audience behavior on these platforms. Amongst the, let's say, all the presenters, she's the one working with more quantitative data, which is what was one of the prerequisites of her research. So about the presentation, so she studies how the integration of artists into a local collaboration network is linked to the evolution of their audience on music streaming platforms. So so what she argues is that musical collaborations are a sign of strong professional relationships between artists and a reliable indicator of an artist's wider social professional network. Previous research has showed that artists use local music collaborations to highlight their local connections in the hope of gaining exposure by affiliating themselves with a local music scene. This being said, commercial success generally requires capturing the attention of the industry professional concentrated in major cities, which are understood as national music scenes, at least in the popular opinion. But this changed with the rise of streaming platforms such as Spotify or Deezer, or also the other platforms that are commonly available, which changed music distribution and consumption. What she argues is that also these platforms contribute to a more, let's say, centralized model that encourages commercial success regardless of the location by reducing the aforementioned dependence on the industry professionals. So while the previous model was more centralized, the platforms in a way enable this model to change and to become more peripheral in a way, but Myriam will expand on this for sure. So the question that she asked is, what is the current role of urban hierarchies and local networks in this commercial success of artists? So how do platforms change the classic model of music distribution and music hierarchy, also in relation to urban hierarchies? So is this kind of relationship between the urban, the social, and the platforms, specifically streaming platform for music? So these are the three presentations. So I hope I didn't go too long, but now I will just leave the floor to Leah first, then Myriam, and finally Sofia, and then we will open up the discussion. And thank you everyone for being here.
Great. Well, I guess in that case, I'll get started. Hi everyone. I hope that you're having an excellent Tuesday. I will just share my screen. And the other thing to say is that I had like notes on speaker view, but I'm not really quite sure how that works. So I may end up ad-libbing slightly longer than I intended to. So yes, hi everyone. A little bit about me. As Emanuele has also done amazingly, my name's Leah Aaron, and I'm doing my PhD at the Bartlett School of Planning. And what I want to talk to you today is about this idea of prop tech and kind of provincializing prop tech, and maybe thinking about the role of platforms in contexts where platforms are actually, or the digital is actually not actually as important as maybe we thought that it was. So yes. Oh God. Excuse me. So I'm going to start off with my research questions. I've a little bit of context. I've just finished my fieldwork, and I'm my analysis, and I'm in the process of writing up. So I've been thinking a little bit more about what my data can actually tell me, and for that reason, the focus of my research has actually shifted a little bit and thinking about international. So I'm looking at this group of migrants who are known and German government speakers, international migrants. And I'm thinking about them as bringing their own kind of expectations of the digital to Berlin's rental sector. In many other contexts across the world, the digital plays a very important role now in everyday real estate transactions, but that isn't necessarily the case in Berlin. So I've got these two research questions that think about international migration playing a specific role in the digitization of Berlin's rental sector, and also asking at the same time how these platforms are creating new types of housing informality for these international migrants. So first off, a little bit of context about Germany. I really love this website. It's called Make It in Germany, and I love why Germany? Exclamation mark, question mark. But Germany has one of the oldest populations in the EU, and it has, I mean, since the Second World War, really, it's had ongoing problems with worker shortage. In the years after the Second World War, this was kind of solved with doing agreements with countries in Southern Europe and even as far as South Korea to bring set numbers of workers into Germany. But in the past couple of decades, the emphasis has changed, and it's become more about like integrating migrants into German society. So Germany traditionally has a jus sanguinis system of citizenship. That means that you inherit German citizenship by blood. But in the last year, actually, that's changed. So now Germany is offering new migrant citizenship in as little as 3 years. And that really has to do with this big drive in attracting skilled migrants to fill these worker shortages. And this is particularly apparent in the tech sector. So Germany because of many things that happened in the 20th century in both East and West Germany, many Germans today have a kind of like healthy suspicion, you could say, of technology and its potential surveillance powers. So Germany has a very cautious relationship to technology, a very specific technopolitics, and generally a big concern with the role of technology in society. So I found this book really helpful. It's called Encoding Race, Encoding Class by Sarita Amrut. And she talks about this turn of the century kind of shift towards attracting Indian citizens to work in the tech sector in Germany in relation and the reaction to that in this 2001 election campaign. Which was talking about Indians. Instead of Indians at the computer, it's our children should be at the computer. So this kind of connection with technology as something that comes from outside and is also connected to this idea of kind of progress and development, but also like very kind of ambivalent, very suspicious. And it also has the sense, I was reading this article last year in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and this is a translated quote, but this sense of Germany being a developing country, technology, Germany's lack of technology is related to its kind of position in this like global hierarchy of development. So it has this very, I would say, important role in the kind of like the migratory politics, and the politics of technology are actually very much intertwined. And that also comes into play. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold. When sorry, we think about the role that housing platforms are playing in Berlin's housing crisis. So Berlin has both a housing affordability crisis and a housing supply crisis. So there's neither enough housing, there's not enough housing, and it's too expensive. And I thought this is a graphic from the rental market report from 2023 from Berlin's investment bank. And I thought it was very interesting because of the way it implicitly acknowledges the role of housing platforms. This is a graph which shows the decreasing length that listings are online on housing platforms from 2014 to 2033. But what I think is interesting about it is it doesn't say which housing platforms they are or where these kinds of listings are. And you can see as well that the blue bars are how many are actually online. And that's kind of completely uncontextualized as well. So there's a sense of housing platforms. They know they play a role. but it's quite kind of under theorized in terms of thinking of like what they actually are, where they're kind of coming from. So there's been a lot of concern about disruptive platforms that are coming from kind of the US. So I recently read a paper by Jia that was talking about how platforms tend to sort of accumulate capital towards or like the general idea is that they accumulate capital towards the west coast of the United States. And I think that certainly has some truth to it when you look at the kind of broader infrastructure of platforms. Um, and I think that's kind of where a lot of thinking about Berlin's kind of technopolitics again, it's not surprising that that's where a lot of the concern comes from towards these West Coast kind of American platforms like Airbnb as kind of disruptive, but actually housing the main platforms that are being used the most in Berlin right now and in Germany more general are German, and they've also been around since the late 1990s. So the screenshot on the bottom right is from one of the platforms that came up the most in my fieldwork by far, immoscout.de. And that's been around since I think like 1998. So this is a screenshot of the Wayback Machine from 2003. So they're actually deeply embedded with the housing market, and they're deeply embedded with the kind of politics of housing crisis, but they've kind of gone a little bit under the radar, and there's been a lot more attention on these kinds of big American platforms that are coming from elsewhere. Yeah, and these are two others on the right and the left. So I guess kind of thinking about my research in a little bit more detail, what I kind of wanted to do, thinking about these entwined kind of politics of migration and technology, was to kind of think about how we could provincialize prop tech, for want of a better word. So I really like this paper from Van Dorn, which talks about migration, migrant labor and platform labor. Migrant labor is platform labor. And also kind of thinking about these early theorizations of prop tech, which are very concerned with processes of racialization and discrimination, but generally in what you might call the Commonwealth countries, so kind of Anglophone, British Empire adjacent kind of locations. And that's also true in studies of shared and informal housing, like much of the work has been done in Australia. So Berlin and Germany more generally has what Albers has called an alternative trajectory of financialization. The housing market works very differently. And so I wanted to come up with a kind of methodology which could capture the way that these kind of platforms are working in practice. So thinking in a little bit more detail then about my theoretical frame and how it links with my methodology, platforms, I'm kind of coming from this kind of, I guess, background which sees kinds of platforms in a kind of infrastructural way. So platforms thinking about this kind of new neo-materialist infrastructural turn that really hit geography in the late 1990s. I found a lot of those frameworks very useful. Also thinking about my background as a human geographer, and leading us towards a kind of phenomenological framing of the platform as like thinking about how it's actually used, what are the subjectivities that produce data as well as the data itself is something that I'm very interested in. And I think that can also help us to think about how the geographies of platforms in more detail, how they actually play out in these very specific geographies. So for that reason, I based my methodology off this I cannot say that word, guys, phenomenological framing, um, um, to and use these kinds of drew on these methods from digital anthropology, notably the walkthrough. So there's walking along, scrolling back, and another one which escapes me right now. But they really look at the use of apps and platforms as a kind of embodied process, and also as a kind of elicitation exercise as well. So in terms of my actual field work, the a scroll along, so like where we look at housing platforms together in kind of more detail, as like kind of users was the main body of my research. So I did that with 45 I call them users, people who are users of housing platforms in Berlin. They're either looking for housing currently or they'd recently moved. So that was kind of the main body of my data collection. And then I also got 10 interviews after much pestering with two groups I call creators, so people who are involved in the development and creation of housing platforms, and people I call regulators, so people working active in like housing activist groups, migrant activism, also local government, also fair housing organisations. And I also kept a research diary. I took voice note field notes, and I did my own walkthrough. So that's where I kind of like experienced the platforms myself before going on the actual field work. And I carried out, you might call it autoethnography, or an alternative title would be screenshotting any Instagram story I saw when someone was posting about looking for a flat or wanting to rent out their room. So in terms of what I found, which wasn't necessarily what I was looking for inconveniently, what I found was really the importance of what one participant called horizontal connections. So informal marketplaces organized on social media sites like Instagram, like WhatsApp, like Telegram, and based along kind of groups of social based along kind of social capital, so like diasporic connections, linguistic connections, connections based on shared queer identity, for example, or shared experiences of gender. They turned out to be actually the most important way that this kind of group of international migrants was actually finding housing. And I think that differs. I did some pilot work for my master's in 2022 or 2023. And I think that was really interesting to see the shift from a couple of years ago, a real focus on ImmoScout, these big kind of housing platforms, towards these kinds of more informal groups. And I think that also has to do with the sheer competition for housing that's currently going on in Berlin. Um, so yes, and that also what I think that also points to is the enduring importance of what Germans sometimes call vitamin B. Vitamin B. The B stands for Beziehungen or relationships. Um, and vitamin B is like this kind of, I mean, you could call it social capital, but the importance of kind of informal economies, thinking about that notion of trust in technology and that kind of fear of surveillance, as being super, super important in the everyday way that economic life plays out in Berlin. So this is from the entry of the history of the word of vitamin B. Um, it kind of came about in the time after the Second World War, and was also very important in East Germany, this kind of notion that, especially in a context of shortage, who you know becomes the ultimate arbiter. And that's what a lot of my participants said as well. Was that actually the sense of like, actually, it's not the money that you have is not important. The job that you have is not actually so important, but it's all about who you know. It's all about the strength of your relationships with other people. And I think the way that the research was designed actually really helped me to capture that, because it was looking at the relationship with the end user. So, yeah, I thought that I just wanted to talk about this little moment in terms of like what this can kind of help us find out. So, this is an excerpt from one of my interviews on Zoom. So I did half of them in person, half of them on Zoom, with one of my final participants. And we were looking at this group for Women Plus in Berlin, which we were both a part of. And I thought that this exchange really like was like gives you a sense of like how revealing these kinds of shared scroll alongs can be. So I was like, I just went to scroll along and I was like, tell me, stop me where you think something's kind of interesting. And we stopped at this photo and she was like, the participant was like, yeah, that's not like a selfie I'm particularly drawn to. And I think because we build up this kind of rapport, um, it allows people to kind of say stuff, I think, because it's in this very kind of embodied, quite informal way that they maybe otherwise wouldn't. So this this photograph is publicly available, by the way. The searcher of the house made their own website for people to potentially find. And I thought that this kind of little excerpt says a lot about the politics of social capital that go on these digital marketplaces in Berlin. So this participant user 42 says like, yeah, like I mean like she says, she says she's a stylist, right? Which is kind of got this sort of, I guess we could call it mean girl energy. And then she says, yeah, I can't help but like have some, opinions around like the aesthetics or something, or like, oh, this feels awful to say, but if someone looks like they're kind of queer presenting, I might be more like, I wonder if they're like for real, or like, so you get the sense that you kind of get a sense of someone's kind of inner monologue in terms of like what they're thinking when they're scrolling through these kinds of sites, and the importance of these everyday impressions of one another's digital footprint that actually become very important for the negotiation of this scarce resource, which is housing, which should be a kind of, human right, or is enshrined in the German constitution as a basic right. Um, so yeah, um, and I think in terms of the kind of issues that I found in terms of my methodology, what I found quite difficult, I guess, was thinking about the scroll through. I use my own phone because of kind of ethical concerns, but that actually made it quite difficult, I guess, in terms of like both in terms of my own privacy, but also in terms of like actually getting data that people like a lot of people wanted to share data with me, their own data, and I would be like sort of send it to me over email, and then that would be kind of long, and it would be quite difficult to get a sense of people's kind of fully kind of embodied, I guess, like without filming them. During the interview, get a sense of their fully kind of embodied experience. So it kind of ended up being like a little bit ersatz. But yeah, I thought that this someone sent me this is their like message. They said they had the perfect message to send to potential flatmates when they were looking for a flat. And I thought that this was quite like a fun, like I said it was zany in the interview and they got really offended. But I do think it has a kind of energetic vibe. Um, but yes. So, and I think another kind of like thinking a little bit more about the methodology, coming back to this idea of like what I really wanted to do was, when I started my fieldwork, was get a sense, and I'm running out of time, was get a sense of like how these platforms worked overall, like how they worked in terms of like a range of stakeholders, but actually because of this techno politics, many people were not very interested in speaking to me. So I actually had to send a fax. I had to send two different faxes in order to get some interviews with local government. And yeah, when I actually interviewed them, they were like, "Oh God, well, when I read earlier the project was about the online exchange of flats, I thought, oh God, I can't say very much at all about that." So yeah, that's the kind of thing that kind of went on. So yeah, and then you have these kinds of senses of like, what is the platform actually? Where there's a sense of like the ambivalence of around the importance of the platform. Actually, this representative of Berlin's housing corporation, which is 1.8 million flats. They have 1.8 million flats in Berlin. They don't 74% of their members never use them. So in terms of like just concluding the kind of presentation then, what I actually have found, what I'm kind of struggling to theorize now, is actually a sense that housing platforms are only the sort of tip of the iceberg, and they're this kind of visible sense of what's available, when actually they sort of obscure a much broader informal market that consists of all of the different ways of finding housing, where different things apart from money, or like a good job, or kind of like credit checks, or etc., are more important. And it's kind of thinking about how can we theorize the platform when what is the role of the platform when the platform is actually not necessarily, it has this kind of very split and ambivalent politics between all of these different groups. So yeah, I'll stop there. Sorry for going a bit over. Thank you.
Great, Leah, and thank you for your concluding remarks. Just for everyone to know, the idea of these seminars is indeed, to share presentations, but also to share doubts or, challenges that PhDs are facing, especially in the case of Leah, when you're about to finish actually the final part of your PhD. It's just natural to have this kind of doubts. So this is a space where we try also, to kind of have a collective discussion about all these elements. So thank you very much, Leah. And so Myriam, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm gonna, excuse me, I'm gonna share my screen first. I'm also gonna hydrate because I don't want my voice to crack either. So I think I can present like this. Mm. Okay. Okay, I think that this is working.
Yeah, great.
Nice. So wait 1 second. Trying to get my notes out as well. All right, so I'm going to start. So hi everyone again. Just to repeat, my name is Myriam Boualami. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student at Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne University in Paris. I actually work in between the, wait 1 second. Okay, good. Sorry, I work in Berlin. I am located at the computational social science team in Berlin. And as Emanuele said, I worked within the Record project, which is a partnership between several research institutions, French research institution mainly, and Deezer, which is a French music streaming platform. And the main strength of this partnership is that they have direct data, direct access, sorry, to all of Deezer streaming data for my research. So in this presentation, I'm mainly going to focus on the idea of using web-generated data for research in social science. So I'm going to ask the questions such as, what can they really reveal about the growing digitization of the world? Web-generated data or web data, they are defined as traces produced by one individual online, whether this trace is voluntary, like a tweet, or involuntary, like a Deezer stream. And another thing that really defines it is the fact that this empirical material is not produced for and by scientific method, so it wouldn't be a survey. And there's been a lot of discussion since the beginning of the 2010, actually, in quantitative geography about the idea of using this web-generated data, specifically regarding whether it has potential to not only change the social realities, so digitization of the world, but also the ways in which us, researchers, we produce knowledge. So the methodological implication of using such data has long been debated, and the key issue that has been highlighted is the one of visibility, as highlighted with the quotes here. On the issue of visibility, the field of quantitative geography is mainly divided in what I would call two factions. You would have the data enthusiasts and the data skeptics. So starting with the arguments of the data enthusiasts, they argue that web-generated data is interesting because it exists at social, spatial, and temporal scales that are unachievable with any other data collection methods, which allows for levels of exhaustivity and representativity of the empirical material that has been never achieved before. And hence, there's a better representation of the object because it is particularly granular. And they argue specifically that this granularity speaks of place specifically. So there's the acceptation in quantitative geography that a place you can kind of define it as a function and one location and one name. So it's one point in space that has a name and that people use for a specific function. And if web-generated data is basically a multitude of individualized practices that are in one location, then web-generated data can point how individual practices, whether they're fleeting or recurring, can produce a place. And usually it sheds light on specifically the hierarchical nature of places. So I'm going to give an example here. So imagine if you had loads of GPS logs for individual users. So the only thing you know is that this first user, the blue one, has logged in those 4 points in space, and you know this about him and her and them and they, and you know this for loads and loads of users. Then you can see that typically those users are located here at night and here during the day. Then all of those very granular, individualized, and decontextualized data would give cues about the functions of places in the city. Here we can clearly see, I was trying to draw more a residential area around and the city center would work at the center. Maybe to give another example on this idea of like how what is specifically shown by web-generated data is hierarchies. Is this the example of a Kenney Zysman, and he worked on starting from Grindr data, and what he has shown through Grindr data is that he was highlighting how Grindr's user patterns, they form a center and periphery in the Paris metropolis with a higher concentration of Grindr users in the center of the metropolis. So that's an empirical example. But so that's all of what the data enthusiasts say. And on the other hand, the data skeptics, again on the topic of visibility, they argue that there's a problem of objectivity in the web data. So the first problem is the one of the opaque condition of production of this data that can hinder interpretation, typically on the idea of representativity and exhaustivity. There's how to explain this better. This idea is a bit more like when you receive all of this data, whether it's from Twitter or Google, you don't really know. Oh yeah, a good example of this is the Twitter API. Now it's closed, but when it was researchers were still able to use it, you could only access 1% of the Twitter users through this API. And you had no idea how Twitter decided on the 1%, who were those people and how representative they were of all of the other users who were hidden. And yeah, that's what I mean by opaque condition of production. On the other hand, there's another problem, the one of with data-driven approach that kind of let the data speak, as opposed to use the classic hypothetico-deductive approach that we use usually in social science, where we start with reading theory and then making hypotheses, then building tools to collect data. On the other hand, and especially in computational science, you just take the data, you look what's in it, and then you try to link it with one theory or another. And this can lead us, the data skeptics are worried of, to the death of a theory, of globalizing theories, where science would go more and more towards smaller and specific, topic-specific theories rather than more globalizing one. I don't think I have the time, so I'm going to have to go over it. And the last point, which is the one that resonates the most with my research, is the one of the actor's intentionality. So because this data, the web-generated data, because data production and collection is automatized, most of the time through algorithm, then it looks like no one is intentionally shaping it, neither researcher nor private companies or individuals. There's a sense of almost like desocialized data that's just collected automatically. And what I really want to highlight here is in my desert data, I wanted to show you ways to give more flesh to it by asking the question of intentionality, whether it's on the side of desert, of myself, mainly through methods and tools I'm going to use, or through the actual artists that I'm studying. Just to speak very quickly about the data, what I have is 50K. I have a sample of 50K user and the whole of their streaming history on the course of 3 years, so 2020 to 2022. The users are not geolocated. I'm not going to go in detail why, but basically they're not. And because they're not geolocated, then I don't study consumption. I mainly study the geography of production. to get this data, I'm lucky enough to be able to make direct requests to the design engineer for the data extraction. Here is like the export scheme that I specifically asked for. Because I know specifically what it is, then I can specifically know which limitations I induced in my data, but I'm not going to go in detail here. Maybe in questions I can show more. I think I'm also running out of time, so maybe I can't speak of the whole problem of the ways in which, because I start from the genera data that's in my data, and this is given to me by Deezer. So I was able to like have an interview with one of the Deezer engineers at R&D to ask specifically how each song is tagged in one specific genre. I just think I'm running out of time, so I can't go in detail. But the overall picture, it highlights that the genre is given by the labels, so like the artist directly to Deezer. And because there's such a high number of different genres, because they're given by so many different actors, then Deezer basically recomputes them internally, and this produces bias in the way in which it's classified. But I can't go over it again. So what I also said is that those genres are at the level of the song and not at the level of the artist. So I had to make a decision on how to assign a music genre per artist in order to filter the rap artist. So the question was, do we take artists with 10% of rap in their catalog, 50, 90, etc.? So in order to set this threshold, I had to measure how this threshold influences how specialized or how eclectic each artist is in his genre based on this threshold. So for that, what I've done is that I calculated how diverse an artist is in terms of the genre it produces by using a specific index that's called the Shannon index. It's a measure of entropy, and it's commonly used in ecology, but also in computational science. It basically measures how diverse an environment is. The way to interpret it is that a Shannon index of 0, here on the graph, it means that 100% of the song of an artist is in a set genre. So for all genre, we can see that effectively, the more strict the threshold is, the more specialized the artists are. So then it makes more sense to say that this artist is rap, jazz, or rock. And on the other hand, the more the threshold is low, the more the artists are eclectic. And just to make a little point here about researcher intentionality, this index is a good example of this, because indeed, this index, it has inherent quirks. If you take here the example of two artists, A1 has released 4 songs in total. They both have released 4 songs, sorry. A1 has released 2 songs in 2 genres, and A2 has released 4 songs in 1 song in 4 genres. Meaning, basically, they both show perfect balance in their production, and they show no specialization. But from the Shannon calculation, the A1 index would mechanically, mathematically be smaller than the index for A2, and which would make A1 look more specialized. And it's really purely due to mechanical effect of the function. When I just said that they both show no specialization, but on the other hand, you also A1 is indeed also producing only 2 genres as opposed to 4 genres, which in that case, it also can be interpreted as a greater specialization. I don't know if you really see what I mean here, but basically the index can mean one or the other. It either can mean that it's specialized or not, depending on and then the researcher has to make a decision when you process the data, even if it's a purely mathematical process, there is still a decision that you have to make about what it's going to mean. And in my case, I decided that indeed it makes sense for A1 here to have a smaller index because it only produces 2 genres as opposed to 4 for the second one. But in other studies, a researcher could have had decided the same if their aim were different. So this is a small example here to highlight that there is researchers' intentionality in the data processing method itself that really have to be spelled out in order to understand the greater picture that's shown in the data. So in this case here, I ended up deciding that I'm going to filter rap artists by saying you are a rap if you produce more than 50% of rap in your catalog. this helped giving like a grounded meaning all of the artists I say are rap are artists that produced majorly rap in their catalog. And just to go quickly over this, I focused on the so-called rising stars. They are artists who were in rap and who started with little to no audience, and then they experienced a rise in their popularity at one point over the course of the 3 years. This is 288 artists out of the 23K that I start with. And when you look at their geography, maybe now is I think Emanuele has given the historical background in his when he introduced my presentation, but maybe I'm going to go quickly over it about the theoretical background. In the geography of rap music scene in France, it's organized in a center-periphery urban hierarchy. So on the left here of like the map that's on the left, this is the pre-music streaming. So this is all of the most famous artists in France between 2007 and 2012. And we can see that Paris indeed concentrates 70% of the most successful artists. And coming second is Marseille with 17%. So that's kind of the hierarchy we're working with. And in that center-periphery urban hierarchy, it has been shown that rap artists make use of local music collaboration to emphasize local tie in hope of gaining prominence by affiliating with a local music scene. But nevertheless, commercial success still required to capture industry professionals' attention, concentrated in national music scenes. In this case, it's Paris. But yet, with a platform like Spotify and Deezer, music distribution and consumption has become increasingly centralized, which helps fostering commercial success regardless of the geography of connection and location by reducing reliance on industry professional. Basically, before streaming, to become popular, you had to be on the radio. The radios are located in Paris. The people who curate for the radio are located in Paris as well. So in order to be put on the radio, you had to have connections toward Paris, all of those informal connections, basically. And there is this idea in the literature, in the more recent literature, that music streaming might have disrupted this need to connect towards Paris, because anyone, no matter where you are, can upload on a streaming platform. So in the platform context of the music industry, I mainly ask in this research, how are local collaborations still effective in terms of commercial success, and how do they fit in the context of dependence to our national scenes? So how do local ties fit in a highly hierarchical urban system? So the first observation from all of those rising stars that I just sampled, so it's the map on the right, we can see that the spatial distribution of the successful rising stars in my sample is alike the one described in the pre-platform literature, with 70% of artists in Paris and 12% in Marseille. And more than this, in the case of Marseille, which is the second historic major scene of rap in France, so I have seen that artists who preferred collaborating locally were more likely to experience a decline in their fame than as opposed to artists who preferred collaborating so away from Marseille, meaning towards Paris, and they were way more likely to experience a sustained growth, so to carry on growing, basically. And we asked, we'll see if this result is interpretable as some kind of empirical finding that would highlight the long-lasting dependency of Marseille artists, so artists who are not in Paris, towards the national scene. And going back to the idea of intentionality, I'm unsure for now at this just with this one unique picture, to which degree these results can also would also vary at different thresholds. So to look at the geography of specialized rap artists, which is kind of what we've looked at right now, versus the geography of maybe a more eclectic rap artist. So would the urban hierarchy of rap scene and the dependency links that we've been able to highlight, would this picture be permanent when rap is defined differently in our data set? And more than this, data skeptic geographer, they argue that decontextualized place, which is kind of what we see here, is nothing but location. Indeed, just has been shown in a very early paper in quantity geography that uses web data, that when people check in or when people upload something on the internet, is that they don't all do it with the same context. So not only the check-ins were not representative of all of the mobility of one user, but also the context behind the check-in were to interpret differently. And for that, this one I want to highlight the importance of mixed methods and having and speaking with the artist specifically. And it's crucial to recontextualize the data that we're using through interviews with said artists to let them kind of tell the data. And I was able to interview to interview several managers. I wasn't able to interview artists because they're too hard to reach, but I was able to interview several of the managers. And what I've seen is the way I geolocate the artist and the way it's done in literature, usually it's based on press interviews. So usually an artist declares that they live in one city and the scientist assign them to this city. And taking the example of one of the artists that was declared to be living in Bordeaux, which is the point number 2 on the map. So I spoke with her manager and he told me that she originally came from Biarritz, which is the point number 1, a smaller town. And then she moved to Bordeaux, the point 2, from where she started her career. And at the time of the interview, she was in the process of moving to Paris, which is the point 3, to get closer to her label, which here, it kind of tells the story of this upward mobility of the artist in the urban hierarchy as she professionalizes. And this story cannot be told only through the user data or data that is accessible on the web. It does really require having interviews. And even more interesting than this, I filtered all of my artists based on whether they collaborated or not. And in my data, she indeed had collaborated, but when I asked her manager about what makes her decide to collaborate with a person or another, he told me that she takes pride in not having collaborated in her career, which is a dissonance between having my data and what is said in interview. And upon closer examination, the collaboration data in my data. It ended up being a collaboration with a producer and not with another artist, meaning that she does not consider that collaborating with a producer and collaborating with another artist is the same, when in my data, both are put on the same level, which then you just end up lacking a very crucial piece of context to interpret your data. So to conclude, I would, what is web-generated data a mirror of or of who? The stories, I think, in my opinion, that web-generated data reveals, they depend not only on who produced them, but also on how their intention shapes what we see. This data, at least the one I was using, often reflected better the actor's intentionality than the actual user practice. Typically, my specific data is uploaded by a specific actor, the artist, then structured internally by Deezer, the specific company, then uploaded on a cloud to which I can query and process through a methodology in order to outline a reality here. And I think that studying the ways in which web data is produced by actor tells a way better story than the kind of blurred shadow that web-generated data can produce of the practice. It does make, in my opinion, the intention of the actors who produce it visible way better than this kind of like quote-unquote reality that data enthusiasts would describe. So I think that web data can be better understood discursively through interviews. It's way more interesting and way more stimulating to articulate it directly with these interviews than to just mathematically process it through models. And I think it tells better story when you do this. Yeah, thank you. I think I went a little bit over, sorry.
It's okay, no worries. Thank you very much, Myriam. Great. We can then turn to the last presentation by Sofia, and then we can turn to the discussion. I'm taking down notes because I think there are some very interesting patterns emerging. I know Sofia's research already, so that's maybe why I could already connect the dots. But we can dig further after Sofia's presentation. So, Sofia, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you also to Leah and Myriam for the very interesting presentation. So I'm trying to move to a different geography and even a different discipline, I will say, because I'm trying to work more on the architectural space. So we are moving to a different typology. So my presentation tried to pluralize platform practices, especially in rural area in China. And I'm working especially on a specific platform, Taobao, which is one of the most C2C, most used C2C, so consumer to consumer platform in China. So the aim is to try to ground the platform studies, especially in this precise marginalized context like rural China, and which kind also of new position we can learn from these places, also to rethink the interplay between spaces and production. So this presentation will try to focus on three parts. The first one is about a general research background, so the question, the title, and the structure, and also, but I will delve especially on the two parts, the most important one, which is one, a more extensive literature review and interpretation of the Taobao villages geography, and another one about the case studies, and try to work on the methodological challenges of working with case study between the tension of particularization of what we can inform and learn in the specific case and the generalization of the Taobao villages. According to the research background, this research tried to explore the infrastructural changes occurring in rural China, long theorized as invisible because was out of policies and as also very out of urbanization processes, with a specific focus on the emergence of e-commerce villages that are interesting case study which show the interaction between rurality, platform practices, and logistics. What I try to define is a sort of rural reinvention, so a double reinvention in which Taobao villages modify even the infrastructural discourse and the infrastructural transformation. The thesis is basically composed of three object, the research object, which is the Taobao villages in itself, the scientific object, which is the transformation of rural spaces through the use of a technical object, so the infrastructural paradigm and the double element of platform and logistics. In particular, I try to ask which kind of new perspective we can learn beyond the mere quantitative growth of these villages, and how do the entanglements between logistics and digital platform materialize and reshape rural landscape, and in which ways we can also rephrase and redefine the logistic and infrastructure debate. Using a circular narrative, in which there are three parts. The first one is about the rural question, then there is a sort of transformation occurring with the logistics, and then going into the case studies towards defining a new route. So there is this sort of circular narrative with something that is changing at the very end. This thesis try also to deal with, this research try to deal with the so-called planetary rural geography, try to propose an argument. So to propose Taobao villages as an example of ruralization. So a sort of rural development model in which the rural is not subjugated to the urban, but instead engages in a more hybrid encounter that reshape both dimensions while keeping them distinct. So I'm talking about more than an urbanization process, a ruralization process. So sort of reshape and reimagine of rural spaces and economies and identities. Going deeper on the Taobao villages, I argue that this phenomena is a phenomenon made in China. First, because is in China, and because in 2009 this phenomena started as a sort of more a bottom-up approach, and it's generally considered as a sort of phenomena in which a number of e-commerce villages are reshaped by the insertion of this platform economy. And there is a precise definition that Alibaba tried to define. So define Taobao villages and e-commerce villages, places where at least 10% of the households actively trade on Taobao marketplace, achieving a turnover of almost 10 million Chinese yuan. So these villages were firstly developed on the coastal and central region and have experienced significant transformation with these e-commerce activities. But this story is actually intersecting with another story, the story of the rural transformation of China. In 2006, the Prime Minister Wang Jiabao and the President Hu Jintao try to define the three rural issues, so define specific characteristics of these three difficulty of the decline of agricultural production, the shrinking economy, and the decline of population. And he has to redefine a sort of policy measure to accommodate this gap. So first he abolished agricultural taxes and then invested in first at hard infrastructure, but also on soft infrastructure. So in 2009, there were first mainly three Taobao villages. The most famous one were Zhongpusun, which is one of the case study actually, Riendongsun in Guangzhou, and Chengdusun, which is located in Yiwu City, one of the most globalized city, which is also the Amazon hotspot in China. So from the 2008, the global capitalist crisis spurred reverse migration to the countryside. So push many rural migrants, which moved to the city, back to the countryside to return home and to seek new economic opportunity to try to also stay also and fulfill their caregiving responsibilities. This move also to the creation of Taobao villages at first as a grassroots urbanization process. But they generate a sort of trend after, because in 2014 there was Alibaba launched an actual and real initiative. And in 2015, for example, the retail sales of local products in remote regions and in rural regions was increased by the 30% due to also this sort of new internet revolution. So the launch of the Rural Taobao initiative was also a way to promote e-commerce development in rural China, but also cause an expansion in the eastern region close to the most urbanized area. So there was a precise location and a precise geography of Taobao villages, which actually materialized more and more. In 2017, Alibaba launched a specific kind of 5-year plan, so a more development initiative, thanks also to the government support. So they try to do a partnership in order to enhance this digital and logistic infrastructure from one side and providing financial incentives for rural entrepreneurs. This led also to the encourage also of more villages to adopt the Taobao model and reinforce the e-commerce as a pillar for rural revitalization, which is one of the most important issues nowadays in China. So the situation increased till 2022, in which we arrived almost reached the 8,000, not properly. And it was also introduced the idea of Taobao Township, in which there are different Taobao villages model integrated into one administrative township. So scaling rural e-commerce by enhancing infrastructural logistics, but reshaping also not just anymore one village, but also the county and the township in itself. And now I will try to say something on why this model is a model made in China. First, of course, because of the geography, but also because there were a sort of constraint, a sort of situation which precisely of the political economy of China, but also the geography of China, which led this model to emerge. First, there was a massive domestic market, so the China enormous population, the so-called floating population, provide a vaster internal consumer base, so reducing reliance on export and allowing e-commerce ecosystem to flourish domestically. There was also strong investment on digital and logistic infrastructure, the state-led development and policy support, which led also to the materialization of this, but also, and in particular, the rural labor surplus and the industrial decline, especially after 2008 financial crisis, and also move also to the transformation of these villages in a sort of new enterprise situation. So instead of moving to cities, rural entrepreneurs can now integrate to global supply chains from their direct hometowns. But also, these also create a new specialized cluster and local knowledge, so by leveraging also on the local industrial cluster, so leveraging on localized expertise and economies of scale. But also this also was made thanks to the G2C platform, which is different from the Amazon model, which is based on highly centralized and organized logistics for high efficiency and scalability. The model of Taobao villages, so from consumer to consumer, individual seller can stay online, can be the one that sell within the platform, and this also move also to a sort of decentralization of the logistic model, providing and encouraging a more localized approach to e-commerce. But also the Rural Taobao initiative shifts rural development discourse from market-driven growth to digital platform dependency. So try to pushing peasants as digital entrepreneurs, yet highly exploitable, with e-commerce platform acting as mediators. So the act was also based on a neoliberal policy and commercialization of collective land rural area, becoming de facto profit-driven business hubs. Also, this also was also based on a sort of platform which monopolized business data, but also distribute the sales and further embedding rural spaces into a cycle of capitalization and commercialization, especially in a society which is also claimed to be a particular form of capitalism. This also was also based on also not just policy and market measures, but also was based also on a counter migration, what we can call human-based logistics. So there was a sort of phenomena of through advertisement to push people back to the countryside, not just with policy, but also with advertisements, so to try to see and to sell a different lifestyle. So there was also a matter of lifestyle, so to better live a better life in a more healthy place, like a rural area in which you can stay at home and you can take care of your family. So they also leverage on this concept of work of care. That's why this process started as a bottom-up urbanization. So there was, of course, a sort of hard infrastructure which facilitate this, but there were also human-based infrastructure, so people which is actually try to work within this process. And it's something that in China started also many years ago, especially with the town village enterprise. It was an experiment from the 80s and 90s, which tried to move the manufacturing activity outside the city, but also to try to define and to promote a new way to industrialize rural area in the process of course, of define a progressive urbanization. This model was also very successful, especially due to the rural land ownership system happening in China. So first, there is a collective ownership with individual use rights. So villages have the right to use and develop their own land, but they cannot freely sell it to external buyers. This also means to prevent also land monopolization from one side, but also increase and decrease the low-cost production hubs. And also this also went together with a sort of capital shift in the countryside toward an equalization trend. So fixed capital integrates in the periphery and in order to devaluate and attract a different kind of investment. So there were specifically two stages: a state-led infrastructural investment, the private capital investment. a sort of phenomena which can be described using the double abstraction, so the vertical and the horizontal from the Marxist tradition. The emergence of Taobao village is based on a dialectical movement of differentiation and equalization. So that since the 21st, state capital and internet capital have intersected with rural society. This also moved to mobilize cheap labor from one side, natural resources, and spatial infrastructure in pursuit of profit. So there is two dimensions that emerge. And also, but this is a sort of peculiar aspect, which in a sort of sense, the Chinese traditional way of living the countryside occurs in a way. So there is a way in which this sort of Asiatic and in particular Chinese agricultural commune and traditional agrarian civilization, which try to reduce differences into this homogenized form. So this sort of new form of capitalism that happened in this specific space is actually try to define and carry the potential for a new common in practice that are totally different from the one we can see in the Western cities. After this long introduction about the phenomenon, I'm trying to delve more on the grounded processes. So the case study in themselves, 3 villages, which I investigated mainly through fieldwork, but also with some interviews and also cartographic drawings, which I'm trying to work with. So try to use both more qualitative data instead of quantitative data. The first village is Dongfeng-Su, a village in Jiangsu province, which is specialized especially in furniture and fake IKEA products. Dongfeng-Su is located in the Suzhou city outskirts in the hinterland. And before the rise of Taobao was a traditional, of course, agricultural village located in these interfaces between the urban and the rural. And in these villages, villagers who were working were particularly inside the artisan products and of wood and wood products. When I was there, I had the possibility to interview many people, in particular Sun Han, which started, was one of, according to him, was one of the first one which tried to open this Taobao village, which actually starts the Taobao village phenomena here, because he was the first one which, after appearing in Shanghai for a very personal reason, was inspired by IKEA and tried to collaborate with local carpenters to create their version of act furniture, with they photographed and listed on their Taobao shop. So as the business expanded, they recruited villages to join inside these sort of family enterprises, and this low barrier entry led to a rapid increase in e-commerce shop and factory in the villages. And this also moved to the transformation of the spaces of the villages in itself. So the progressive elimination of some farmland in order to accommodate a new form of rural settlement together with workshop. There is a sort of coexistence of these two activities. Initially, few entrepreneurial pioneers had their own spaces, while others tried to open online shops selling furniture. Over time, new villages try to establish factory and try to collaborate with this sector. This development also expanded toward the local supply chain, covering both raw material and accessories. So the logistic infrastructure was also supported by an existing logistics system. But as you can see from this picture, there are different activities that overlap. The logistic from one side, the stores from the other, and all together with the agricultural activities. So there is not a precise boundary between these two elements. At the same time, the spaces of the workshops happen inside the home spaces. So there is this sort of home workshop, living and work together that overlap. And it's a story in which the courtyard houses workshop typology try to define a new spaces. So they are not just the spaces of houses, but also the domestic spaces, which is radically reduced to accommodate production purposes, which means also to try to use very simple elements to transform and to make this sort of labor entering. But also the appropriation of street and loading docks as extension of public spaces. The second story is about Zumpusun, another village which actually shares some similarity with Dongfengsun, which is specialized in studying clothing and leather products. Again, it was the same very little known village, reliant on traditional subsistence farming. It was more an historical settlement of Akka, actually. So as a different kind of shape in terms of materiality, and it was considered a sort of Desakota, so an area between the urban and the rural. The area at the moment is hosting more than 300 online shops active both on Taobao and JD. But this also means that some kind of situation are emerging. Again, also here I had the possibility to try to tell the story of some people I interview, and all of them share more or less same story. They were pretty young and they launched their successfully Taobao boutique while they were working as a migrant worker in Guangzhou or in another city. And so after the financial crisis, they moved back to the countryside to try to reopen new activities. And to try also because they need to take care of their family. So they open this sort of family-based enterprises. The story is different for the person that actually is one of the entrepreneurs who works on the logistics, which is actually at the beginning wanted to open a boutique in a sort of storage space within the fabric of Zumpu, but he actually found out that the rent cost was too high for him, so the land price changes a little bit. So he had to relocate his spaces outside the village in itself. But everything was based on the local capacity of adapting to this logistic infrastructure, because everything started actually within the spaces of the shops, which actually happens within the spaces of domestics. So as you can see from this slideshow, we can see different transformation happening in different areas, from being a sort of, let's say, more agricultural based environment towards something that is rapidly, of course, a little bit urbanizing, but at the same time, there are some processes which actually made this being a sort of rural area in itself. And as you can see from here, there are different situations emerging. So from one side, this sort of traditional courtyard houses fulfilling with new activities and new storages. And from the others, also a sort of hidden, invisible production and invisible space of production which emerge. Everything is reliant on human infrastructure and people, also the logistics in itself. And also there is a coexistence between the rural part and the rural practices also, and the logistic and platform practices. The space here is orbital because also its dynamics extend beyond the administrative boundary of the villages in itself, and buildings unfold as open works, becoming arenas for a layering of uses that blend domestic and professional spheres. There are different spaces that emerge, so the commerce space, the space of production, the courtyard again, and backyard of homes, and the living spaces. The third story is going to be a little different story because we are located in Zhejiang province, a more agricultural area, with there is a very interesting agricultural activities made especially of tea and bamboo products. The story is a different kind of village. It's a small village in a very remote area. It's defined as, again, as a sort of remote Taobao village because it's located very far from a city. And in 2014, the story of Wuchuchen started in 2014 when it was inserted in the list of the most vulnerable places in Zhejiang province because it was located in the Lishui city, which is actually a city undergoing a process of transformation. In this place, there was again also a conversion of traditional homes or buildings, transformation of vacant storefront and repurposing of community center. But the situation is different because first it was a different village made of agricultural products, and also as a more old people and old inhabitants, which also changes a little bit and move also to a transformation and reorganization of the infrastructure. So peasants actually face challenges. So to try to reorganize the infrastructure to sell this product, to recreate and to, in a sort of sense, to go beyond this sort of advanced technology, which is still, according to them, of course, rely on constant manual effort. So not just about selling, but also try to manage equipment, also ensuring everything runs smoothly, etc. But also this also move also towards a sort of representing an image of this marginalized rural area. So several factories these sort of enterprises try also to define a setting of their products, also to try to stay within also this kind of narration of rural places, which shouldn't be exactly just so too rural. So in these places, in this village, there were three levels of different conflicts also that which arise. On one side, the authenticity and live e-commerce. So live e-commerce also involves managing tangible spatial elements such as products, infrastructure network, and also try to create an authentic rural experience. The spatial material challenges, so the requirement to create a dedicated live streaming spaces, but also a problem of monoculture and environmental impact, because in a place where monocultural farming already dominates, this spatial material challenges also further aggravate environmental issue, try to also transform soil degradation and also exacerbate the ongoing process of ecological footprint. Try to define a sort of conclusion of this, one of the possible conclusion of this presentation. I try to argue that this landscape are beyond automation. A new model of coexistence emerged, aligning with the trend of counter-urbanization driven by reverse migration from rural to urban and back to rural. So first, rural migrants return to the villages, reshaping spaces and daily practice by blending traditional socio-spatial organization with new form of entrepreneurship. So in Taobao villages, rural structure appear transformed, but the essence of rurality persists. Is a rurality which is based on the processes of rural society, and in particular the family production enterprises. So here a new division of labor emerged with a new form of descending familism, which describes the downward flow of family resource in a shift in existential meaning from ancestor to grandchildren. And also this marginalized context function as infrastructure rely a lot on residents' abilities. So there is not just automation and sort of everything that works in a sort of digital platform, but there is also the livelihood, the lives in itself of residents that and their interaction with one another, which really transform these spaces an outcome of collective effort, open and flexible and provisional. This is all from me. So thank you so much for listening, and yeah.
Thank you, Sofia. Amazing. Thank you so much. So I would ask, oh, Leah is already there, obviously. Ask Leah and Myriam to come back to the main. Yeah, there you go. And so thank you again, Sofia. Thank you, Myriam. Thank you, Leah, for all your presentations. So I would like to ask maybe if anyone in the room, like other participants here, want to, have questions, remarks, doubts, comments. So if there's any, feel free to, show yourself, turn on the camera or the microphone and ask the question. Otherwise, you can write the question in the chat and then we'll read it for you. Otherwise, I will then move to, let's say, the discussion part. Maybe if any one of the, maybe, I don't know if Julia or Francesca are still connected, if you can collect the questions, if there's any later. In the meantime, I can move to the discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can do that.
Thank you, Julia. So I was writing down some of your some keywords. It wasn't easy to to find connectors, also because you not only use different methodologies, but you also have different themes, different interests in a way. But there are some, let's say, common threads, some fil rouge, connecting all your thesis, your researches. So the question that came up to me was this one. So what are we looking at when we look at platforms? So this was the main question, because in a way, each of you showed a kind of different angle on platforms. In the case of Leah, it was how this conditions the trajectory of migrants, but also on the other hand, how the trajectory of migrants shapes platforms, because they use different algorithms, or maybe new platforms emerge, new spaces rather than platforms. Because it's true that Telegram, WhatsApp, Instagram are all platforms, but they're all different. So, and they're used informally rather than, relying on some more formal platform that is meant to be for housing purposes. Then people turn to informal spaces. So that's why maybe I use space rather than platforms in this case. So this was the main question. What are we looking at when we look at platforms? And then some keywords that I kind of extracted from your presentation. So platforms, practices in the case of Leah, spaces in the case of Sofia, behaviors. So, and in a nutshell, what you worked on was housing and platforms, music and platforms, commerce and platforms. So I'm not sure about this connector, that the connector and works, or at least I think all these kind of methodological attempts that you're using, but I'm using as well in my research, somehow is a way to find the right connector to connect the spheres of the real in a way. I think some of you use the reality as well. I don't remember who, but connecting the reality with a kind of space that is not physical in a way. In the case of Sofia, is more physical than not, but in other cases is really much about social relationships. In other cases, it's about hierarchies, as Myriam has shown. So what's the methodological angle that we should use, and what are we doing with our methodology, given this kind of gray space we're navigating? And so a concept that I'd like to discuss with you is this one. So can we interpret platforms as a kind of reality shaping black box? So, and the methodologies we're using are a way of navigating these boxes. On the one hand, we try to make sense of the real, so what we see, what we perceive, what we map, what we draw. But on the other hand, there's this kind of space that is, on the one hand, shaping what we're seeing, but at the same time we are part of it. So there is this kind of reciprocal relationship that we are trying to. There's this tension, that we are trying to navigate, to manage through methodologies, and but in part our methodologies fail to do it, and in part show some of these tensions, I believe. So at the end, I think when it boils down to a question, if we do consider platforms as black boxes, so something that we can perceive but that we cannot see as as clearly, and we are trying to find the connectors between what we are studying migration, streaming, logistical platforms, commerce. So, and if we're trying to understand this relationship, then the real issue is understanding the direction, that this kind of that platforms and reality have. So is the platform changing the reality, or is the reality changing the platform? So is it something that happens simultaneously and we do not know the direction of it? So it boils down to the issue of the chicken and egg dilemma, which is a completely different stream of literature, but it's the idea of what do I start from, and what is conditioning what, or what is what is changing what is shaping what, and where do I start when I apply my methodology. So just to close up this mini intro, and the question I have for you is this one: did you feel at any time during your research, even now that maybe you're in the process of analyzing it and trying to make sense to connect it with the literature, which at the end of the day is what other researchers are doing to do exactly what you're doing. So to, create a conceptual framework or give empirical evidence. So my question for you would be, do you think this kind of, a platform as a reality shaping black box make sense? So, or like, do you perceive it at any point in your research? And then the second question would be, where did you start from? If there's this kind of, black box, if there's this kind of, well, Sofia used invisible, which is, I think, is a good invisible, hidden, somehow, these kind of adjectives, I think all apply to it. But where did you start from? Because generally as a PhD, you start from an interest. I'm interested in platforms. So like, housing. But then where did you start from, and how did you manage to navigate these uncertainties, or how are you doing it right now? If it's not clear, I can expand on this, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know who wants to start first. Maybe, I don't know. I can start.
Whoever feels like it.
Okay. No, very, very interesting point. So I would like to start say that actually my research in itself didn't start with the platform. I was interested in Chinese urbanization processes occurring in the countryside and which kind of new narration we can reframe. And then I found out this phenomena, which is actually was Taobao villages in itself, which was already described in the literature, but there was a gap. The gap was that every literature was based on a non-spatial reading of the spaces, and also a not a grounded position and ground interpretation. So they were interpreted as a sort of dot within the map, while actually they aren't just a dot. And indeed, when I try to do the first map, you see that I did in different moments of time in which Taobao villages evolved through GIS. I encountered a sort of difficulties also to understand where actually these locations were located, because from the point I couldn't understand exactly the location of these spaces. So I had to face a new sort of constraint to try to really ground these spaces. And again, I think that these also deal a lot with this concept of the black box, because if we consider the platform of a black box, we need to also consider where it's located, also where actually it fails, where it grounds also. Especially from my point of view, since I am an architect and an urbanist, and I wanted to deal with the actual transformation. And so then I had to start from really going into the fragilities of the point. So I started to ask and to interview to some people through Taobao, so using Taobao, where is located your shop? Of course, using Google Translate, so there is new platform, not Google Translate, but Apple Translate, because Google is not allowed in China. And then through a different informal network, I arrived to the precise location of the spaces. And then from that, there was the try to deal with this matter of invisibility, because of course, platform is a sort of redistribution, is a network, acts as a network, but also as a node. And I was reading one of the node of this platform, or the different nodes of this platform. So I remember that when I entered the field, I was just I was ended my book about by Anna Tsing about the mushroom at the end of the book of the word, and I was doing. I was thinking that I was doing the same thing, but actually it was totally different because I didn't start from a precise object to investigate. I was investigating the infrastructure. And then when I moved to the village in itself, to the different villages, I always had the difficulties in seeing the platform. Where was the platform? And so this is something that I'm trying to deal also now, because I always refer to invisible China as a category which is also applied to rural in general. So no matter which kind of process, if it's an urbanization process, if it's infrastructural-led urbanization process, or so, because according to Scott Rozelle, which is one of the main scholars about rural China, they define rural China as invisible space. But actually, the category of invisibility apply also to the platform in itself, because you need to ground, in order to ground it, you need to also to make visible somehow. These are some points I was thinking about.
If Myriam would like to intervene on this.
Yeah, I can answer your question from my perspective. As opposed to Sofia, my PhD started with the idea of platform, as the whole record project, the one I'm in, it got birthed through a partnership with Deezer. So the idea of using the data is at the center of what we do in this project. And there's most of the people in this project are either sociologists or qualitative geographers. So there's not many people who started doing those kind of big models that you can find more in computational social science. And that was my job, so to say, with being sent to Berlin. So the first step of my PhD was actually learning all of those modeling, computational and modeling methods, because that's not what I've been, that's not the background I come from, actually. Originally, I come from a bit more, not only qualitative, but also more GIS. And the methods to use to kind of model and extract knowledge from those data are not the one that would be usually used in quantitative geography. So that was the main kind of uncertainty that was around my methodologies, was just to step to learn it. And what I've seen after assisting to loads of conferences and being in a computational social science team is that data processing is not as objective as what we would expect. It's not necessarily that you're just unveiling some kind of a reality that's inside the data, but it's way more of twisting and turning and transforming the data and centering and normalizing it and looking at average and trying to and clusters and all of those kind of data transformation. And there's a lot of steps where researchers themselves make decisions about the meaning of the tool they're using and the meaning that they're infusing in the data. And I think that was the first thing I had to learn in the first 2 years of my PhD. That's why I was trying to a bit exemplify in my presentation, but I don't know if this went through, but that's kind of the point I was trying to make. And after this modeling step, I realized that there were so many holes in the data and we really needed to contextualize it. And that's when I started doing interviews. And I was lucky enough to have interviews with digital engineers, but also with artist manager. And then I kind of just realized that their positioning towards the data and what they were telling me it says or it doesn't say was way more interesting than whatever I was able to model through this kind of twists and turns. And yeah, that's kind of an answer to your question.
No, just to have just a short rebuttal. I think it's interesting that you pointed out that unlike Sofia, you started from the platform, while Sofia started from something completely, unrelated in a way, apparently unrelated, because in the case of Sofia, she tried to find explanation of counter-urbanization, or rural China urbanization. So rural China urbanization in platforms. But in your case, you try to find explanation of platforms, let's say data, like patterns that you saw on platforms through urbanization. So that's why I was pointing out this kind of, reciprocal relationship, something that is in the two dimensions that somehow mutually affect each other. And I agree with you. I like quantitative methodologies, but I do agree that they help you to find patterns, but they do not help you to interpret patterns, because that's up to the kind of explanation that you give to the patterns you observe, and in that case you can rely on different interpretations which are more qualitative in a sense. Of course, there are more, let's say, objective descriptions, but there, as any methodology, I think there are pros and cons. And in the case of Leah, instead, I'm not sure that I don't remember where you started from, actually. If you started from migration or you started from housing or platforms.
I guess I read the Cyborg Manifesto at an impressionable age. Um, but yeah, I guess I was always interested in, yeah, I guess this idea of the black box actually, and how sort of opaque are platforms, and how much of a difference does the way people actually use them make. I think like the I guess for me, what I think has always been interesting about digital technologies is like the way that we talk about it. Actually, there's this kind of narrative that it's almost got this like magical, semi-mystical quality to it. But in fact, at its core, it's these quite basic, it's mechanical processes. It's like, it, in a way, there are many people working in these fields, and it's not necessarily, I think, like it's often like not as dystopian, I think, as we kind of think. So I guess, yeah, that was kind of my interest. And then I moved to Germany, and I just like got really interested in the politics of these housing platforms, and the politics of living in Berlin, which I'm sure Myriam can also speak to. And I thought looking at digital platforms was just a really good way a really fitting way to explore that, because that's where a lot of the biggest drama is captured.
Yeah, clear. And I think
And
in your
and if
case,
I can add,
of course.
sorry.
Yeah, of course.
No, yeah, I think Leah's just to wrap up, I think Leah's presentation was quite interesting, because actually started from platform, and as you said, then the conclusion were more about disintegrating it, or the fact that this centrality was not even there. I mean, I think these are the conclusion that's really interesting in that. So then you start from the centrality of something in a way, and then you realize that so much somehow ambivalence, and how you mentioned it was very interesting. And yeah, all of yours, of course, were very interesting. And congratulations to all of you.
Yeah, I think the main difference in this research is that she looked at the experience both on the platform, but also the experience of looking for a house, which is not the same thing. The experience of migration. So in a way, it touches upon these two kind of, distinct yet intersecting spheres of the same thing. And that's why it's easier, to jump from one to the other, because you look at the experience, which is the common ground of analysis, which is in that case, I think it was also a bit easier, because if you look at for instance, the analysis of music, of the streaming platforms, it's much more difficult, because you can't dig into the consumption of music, which is one of the things that Myriam pointed out since I think the first slides, so that you can look at the production, but on the consumption. So it's a bit. Also, it would have been so much very, very interesting to see. I think you pointed it out at the last slide, the last two slides. So the kind of mobility, you know, you called it music mobility. I don't know, like the kind of path that artists followed. As they increased popularity, they also moved from city to city, going into increasingly, let's say, more relevant hubs. So that's super interesting. Yeah. Anyway, I guess there are no other questions. So I would like to really thank you so much for your presentations, and I really hope we can meet like in person one of these days, or like at a conference. I don't know. Maybe we can organize something ourselves. I don't know. Let's keep in touch anyway, and keep up the good work.
And thank you,
you.
Emanuele, for organizing it.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you.
Ciao, guys.
Bye, everyone. Have a good
Bye,
afternoon.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye, bye.